Good morning.
Good morning.
Pleasure to be here. One of the things I learned when I became chair of the Ways and Means Committee, and a very important thing, is that 1 and 1 is not 2. 1 and 1 is whatever I want it to be. And we now learn that 10 minutes comes into that same category.
To be fair,
It was too easy. It was too easy.
it was 10 to 15.
I'll ask for equal time.
Please.
It is interesting that we are doing or concerned about what we can do to reform the system that we have in place now. And I've been in the legislature for 36 years, and I've probably voted for about 36 different forms of reform in that time. Some of it has gone through, some of it has not gone through. It always comes up at the time when we're short of money. It's always somewhere or other to find out what we're doing and why. And one of the things I had trouble understanding was the different forms of work that we do, whether we should be using GAAP or cash, what should we be working with. And I started thinking about different things that I remembered as a child. When I was very young, Bobby Kennedy decided he was going to go after Ma Bell. I don't know why he decided to do it, I don't remember exactly. But he was then the Attorney General, and he started giving them a hard time and asking them to show books and everything else. And after a year, he gave up. And he gave up because he realized, and this is, some people may have to explain to other people what those are. You know, telephone booths, you remember those? Were in the street. And how can you account for money on something that is constantly moving? The money that they were getting in constantly, every day money was coming in. And in those days, they didn't get checks and credit card payments. It was cash. People went to Ma Bell on the street and made a bill payment there. Or they went to the telephone and they dropped first a nickel, then a dime, now a quarter, now it's gone. In the telephone. And that money was coming in. They had people going in with suits with no pockets. You know that? They used to wear a gown with no pockets to count the dimes. And that made it impossible for them to determine exactly what was going on, because they realized that any moment, at any time, trying to freeze it, the telephone company could move money around and make them wrong. Well, New York State is the same thing. We don't have telephone booths, but we have little stores sending money to us constantly. It's called sales tax. We have taxes coming in different variations. We have money coming in from the federal government. We are a cash system. It's the money, not the accounting procedure. It's the money that we deal with. But we also have to deal with some of the problems of dealing with money. One of the problems I had 14 years ago was to understand why, when things were doing very well, and we never had a surplus. We always found a way to spend it. But when we had money, and we would be doing good, an increase in money was coming from Wall Street, we would say 5 years from now we would be in deficit. We were always in deficit. I never had a year that I can remember where at the end of a period of 2 or 3 years, we didn't claim that we were in a structural deficit. And then I began to understand where some of that came from. Some of it comes from sunsetting. Liz mentioned sunsetting, but when we do accounting, we assume we're not going to pass a bill. A lot of our sales tax comes in, and every 2 years, all the localities, every 2 years we pass those sunsetted bill before it sunsets. But when you're doing the accounting, you must make the assumption it is not going to happen. We also have a law which is called the education law. We have never, ever used it. We notwithstand it every time we write a bill. At the end of this year, when we pass our budget, it will say notwithstanding and blah, 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 and it throws it out. But when you're making your accounting for the future, you have to assume we're not going to do that. Henceforth, if you use the rules that were in place, if you think what we're doing now in terms of expenditure is heavy, it would really balloon. So those numbers are why you always end up having these deficits. Once in a while, they are rare. This is that year. This is that time. We are in deep trouble. The numbers are there. And for the first time in a very long time, I think it happened in 91 with Cuomo, we also have a cash problem, which has nothing to do with the budget. It does have to do with the budget, but it really doesn't. We have a cash problem. So when the governor says, come June 1st, he's not giving money on education, he's not going to pay certain bills, he's saying that because he has a cash shortage. And that is a problem that we have to deal with. And when we pass this budget, which we're going to pass tomorrow, that's for the press. I am constantly a believer that we can do it immediately. But when we do it, we will still have that cash problem. Unless we do some things which has to be done, which is part of the recommendations that we have in our plan or our budget reform initiative, which we have a print of 10408. We did not pass it when we passed our resolution. We put it into the resolution. And it says the things that we plan to do. One of the things, of course, we have to deal with is that cash flow. And we will have the ability, right now we have the ability to borrow under the LDAC law that we put in. We're going to have to borrow, and we're going to have to borrow in the next couple of weeks. In my opinion, they haven't talked to me about it, but it's my opinion that in the next couple of weeks we're going to have to go to market and get some money, because that's the way we'll be able to pay some of that money that we owe and pay that off. Now, talking about dates of budget, 1943, and I never got the full story, but when Dewey was coming in, he had just been elected. I think he needed an 8-month year, and he threw in the April 15th. Now, when he did April 15th, the Ides of March were the days that we paid our federal income tax, March 15th. So he anticipated that having an April 15th date for our April 1st date for our budget, we would not be in trouble. We'd have 15 days, we'd have cash coming in. Well, the federal government decided to get on track, and they switched to April 15th. So we end up with this rear end backwards situation where we have to guess how much money we're going to have when we pass a budget on April 1st, which does create a lot of problems. Basically, over the years, it's been the biggest fight we usually have. How much revenue do we actually have? And that determines how much we can spend. And one of the biggest things that we fought over the last 20 years or 23 years when we were having late budgets was always education. It was always about education. How much money was available, and could we give that money to education? Each and every year, we always ended up spending more money than the governors recommended in their initial budget. And over the years, all of the boards of education learned to deal with it. One of the things that no one talks about is because they're not allowed to have it. They're not supposed to have reserves. And a lot of the localities, they're supposed to, if they have cash availability, they're supposed to give it back to the voters. But they've learned ways to hide things, just like the mayor of New York City. He's paid his rent for 20 years on everything. He's found ways to hide money that people have never seen. You ever look at his accounting? He does a wonderful job. He prepays, so that he never ends up with that $100 million mark, which means he'd have to give a tax cut. He doesn't do it. So the boards of education did the same thing. It's one of the reasons, though, they did not like what we were doing last year. They did not want us to cut the programs because they thought it was not a correct time to do it. Now, we're going to be doing it this year, a massive cut. We've taken a position which is different than what others have taken. Our position is that we're going to restore about $400 million worth of money that we will be giving to education, because we still believe, as we've believed in the past, that the most important thing to our future is education. And if we mess with that, it's wrong. It would be terrible if we allowed the subprime problem and Washington's inability to do correct oversight. They stole a lot of our banks. They told them, come down to Washington. You're free, you can do whatever you want to, and they did. And we know what's in the papers today of how bad it is and what was done. But we surely don't want the children of this state to pay for that stupidity, for that greed. And that's what would happen if we end up with massive cuts to education, if we increase class size. Because that's what we're talking about when we talk about cuts. We're not just talking about taking money away from them. We're talking about reducing the amount of teachers, increasing the size of the classroom, getting rid of the programs, music and art and all those things. We don't need those. We can get rid of those. Those are the things that will go. And we can't allow that to happen. So we will be working forward to do something about it. But I'm here not to talk about that, but to talk about the changes that we'd like to do in our reform. And the one that we have was, this would achieve structural balance in 5 years, would change the budget process from one based on cash to one based generally accepted accounting principles. Still having to worry about cash because that's what counts. Would require the budget to be balanced on a GAAP basis at the year's end. A 5-member review board would review enacted budget and mid-year budget reports for a GAAP balance on a state operating funds basis. In the event of the board finds the budget is not balanced, it would require the executive and the legislature within 60 days to take management or legislative action to correct the imbalance. Would authorize the director of the budget to take steps to reduce the budget on a pro rata basis to bring it into GAAP balance if the above actions are not taken. Create a new category of personal income tax, PIT bonds, called transition bonds to provide financial assistance with the state going from a cash basis budget to a GAAP budget. The bonds would be capped at 10% of the 5-year accumulated deficit. The bond would be issued over 3 years with a gap of $2 billion in any 1 year and maturing within 10 years. That's our basic recommendation, but we have on record other forms of reform that we've put in the past that we hope would help solve what happened. But I would like to end with one thought. We did not get into this trouble because we overspent, because we were running around wasting. We got into this problem because Wall Street, which is our General Motors, that example, look what they did to Michigan. But our General Motors messed up. They really, really messed up. And we know it. And right now, there's this argument going in Washington. Should we punish them? Should we do something about it? Yeah. If your child does something wrong, you punish it. You don't get rid of it. You don't send the kid out in the street. But there are things that are done and new rules are put in place. We have got to make sure there is reform and oversight in what happened. It should not have happened. But it took 20% of our budget. Had we been very frugal, had we not increased education, had we kept the class size up, had we given back all the money in tax cuts, done all of that, we would be in this problem today. Instead of $9 billion, it would have been $7 billion. You look at the other states, there's every form of state. Arizona is the most conservative state you want to find. And they're in trouble. I mean, everybody got into trouble with this because this was something that was unexpected, something that we couldn't deal with. We've had that happen to us twice in the last 10 years. 9/11 took us out. What happened there was because of that. It wasn't what we did that year, because we had off-budget monies, something we didn't discuss here, but we had like $5 billion stashed away, so we didn't get into the problem, and it was because of tobacco and some health things that we did. We sold the blues, and we ended up getting more cash than we anticipated, and we never put it in the budget. We kept it off budget. I mean, that's another thing you want to talk about budgeting. And Mr. Pataki did that, the other side of the aisle, just for the record. So we did those things. So we are now in a situation where we have to deal with the mistakes they made. And as I said before, we shall not make it the children or those people who most need health care. We can't make them the people that pay for that problem that we created. And I thank you all very much.